Hello, everybody. Did everyone have a good week? I'm going to take that as a yes, a resounding yes. Come on down. Let's get started. Quick announcement. So I did double check because we've been having some issues with the space, and we are going to be back in the Haft next week. Okay, so it's our last time in the Haft, next week in the Haft. Then we're back in here for the rest of the semester. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Next week we'll be having Mark Drew speak. He's a photographer, fashion photographer, far night photographer, and we will again be meeting in the Haft. So just make sure that you get there as early as possible so that we can get started on time. All right, there's a lot of activity going on today. So I want to introduce our speaker of today, Sylvia Heisel. I'm so excited to have her come. She was highly recommended from one of our earlier speakers, Eric Soldat. As you know, we've been talking a lot about textiles in particular this semester, and I think that Sylvia's perspective in particular will be of great interest to you. Sylvia is a fashion designer. She's a creative director working with new materials, manufacturing, and physical computing for fashion and wearables. She's an expert on 3D printing, functional fashion, designing smart wearables, and new material application or manufacturing applications for fashion. She's developing a workflow and manufacturing system for 3D printed apparel. She's named one of the 25 forward thinkers defining the future of fashion, one of the top 100 women in wearable consumer tech, and 12 amazing people you need to know in New York fashion tech. She's a frequent speaker on the fashion tech. She's led workshops on 3D printing, and she is the founder of her own studio, Heisel 3D Labs, wherein she works with designers and other clients to develop their fabrics and designs. So thank you so much, Sylvia, for coming, and welcome. All right, we're live.
Okay.
So nice to have you.
Hey, thank you. Nice to be here. Hey, all. Bright light up there.
So Sylvia has a really interesting sort of arc in her career, and so I thought we would just start sort of at the beginning a little bit here and just kind of find out how you ended up in the fashion industry and ultimately as a fashion designer, and we'll kind of get into how that pivot happened later on.
Okay, sure. So I was the little girl that wanted to be a designer. And I actually didn't go to fashion school. I just started when I was about 18. I started making clothes, making jewelry initially, selling it, spent a bunch of years starving and working every other job, became a designer, built up a business, became a CFDA member, had that business be successful, and then watched that business sort of become really paralyzing and not creative and start to go down, and then had to go, okay, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. What do I want to do? And then got into technology and how can we make things in new ways, and how could I get excited about fashion again?
What was it about fashion at that time that was sort of pulling you down? Was it just the business aspect of it, or just working with the same materials over and over and over again?
I think the same materials and the same manufacturing. I think once you build up a brand, you have a couple of styles, and that's what everybody wants, and that's what you're known for. And, each season, 4 to 6 times a year, we'd be like, okay, it's new, and we're doing something new, and it's all going to be exciting and new. And nothing was new. And there wasn't none of our retailers wanted anything new. They wanted the same thing recolored, maybe an inch longer, a variation on it, but anything different, they'd be like, oh no, that's not good. So it was the nothing of new.
And it's so interesting because that really is success in the fashion industry. If you have a style that continues to get reordered over and over and over again, and that you're known for something, that really...
That's how you make money.
Right, that's how you make money.
That's how you make money. That's how your business grows. And as long as you go into it knowing that, that's awesome. But if you go into it thinking, I'm going to be creative and I'm going to do things that are different each season, and what I want to do is create new things, it sucks. It's like,
So you saw the money going up and the creativity going down, essentially.
yeah, and then at a certain point, because we were doing evening wear, also the money started to go down because you could see that the styles were changing and that people weren't dressing as much, and that there's less and less evening wear, and especially less high-end evening wear. So it wasn't like, oh, we're going to be able to scale this further.
Right, so you saw an end or an expiration date
yeah.
on that. Was it, I mean, in evening wear, obviously you get to work with a lot of beautiful fabrics and work with some of the best,
Right.
sewers and such, but what was it about sort of the textiles themselves that kind of got you interested and sort of in them specifically, and sort of how they're developed and ultimately how they might be developed differently?
I think I came to that kind of later. I started out just with looking around and what is new and what was inspiring. And I started out with technology and with like, okay, the world is changing because of tech stuff. And I would go, there are a couple of conferences on wearable tech. And I went to those, and I was literally the only fashion person there.
Oh, interesting.
Like there is, in the world of wearables, it was all engineers, it was all
Techs.
hardcore tech and electronics people. And I'd be like, hi, I'm in fashion, and this is wearables. And they look at me like, what's that? Like,
What year was this when you started?
this is like 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay. Oh, wow. So it's not even that long ago.
So it's not that long ago, and there still aren't that many people in fashion at those conferences.
Mm-hmm.
There is still a real wide gap and a really big opportunity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I know you had some pictures, so I want to make sure from your early collections and early work, let's make sure we hit a few of those.
So this is what I used to do. Those are silks, and that was the stuff we were known for, was really clean, elegant, easy, lots of colors. And that was the stuff that got really boring. And
How long is a long time ago? Like 10 years ago?
yeah, those are like 10 or 12. Okay, no, those are probably, I think that was like 12 years ago, but those styles were ones that we just did over and over again. So this was the first 3D printing thing that I did. And this was, as you can see, 2012 with iPhone 4. I went to, there's a thing called Maker Faire. And that was the first time I really saw 3D printing. And it was like, oh my God, how do I use this for fashion? This is the most amazing, different way of making things. And the only thing we could come up with, at the time, you couldn't do anything flexible.
Right.
There was no way to make it clothes or anything. That's a bioplastic. It's pretty limited what you can do. So we made iPhone cases, and we made monogrammed iPhone cases. But in 2012, you couldn't have monogramming options on a website.
Because of Apple?
Because you couldn't have that many different selections on an e-commerce site.
Right, okay.
This is how far we have come quickly. So the site that we were selling on was like, well, don't worry about it. Just do some, do what the fuck, do sex, do. So that was our first 3D printing. This was our first 3D print, and we sold actually a lot of those iPhone cases. Those iPhone cases were very successful and got us into the 3D printing world. And this was the first 3D printed dress that I did, and this was done for a trade show. And I had been going, no, it's impossible. We're never going to be able to 3D print dresses. We can't do it. It won't work. The technology's not there. And then someone came to me and said, here's, we want you to make a dress for this big 3D printing show. And it was like, okay, fine. And that started it, and I will never again say, no, that's impossible, you can't make that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this dress you totally couldn't sit down in, or it's a mesh, it would all break apart. But it looked really good. So
that had to have been like a new creative spark then, to be able to like, realize there were things you hadn't thought of doing before.
Yeah, and to think, okay, if there's one thing I've learned from the tech world, it's that they all go, think of what you want to do, and then figure out a way to do it. If there's not a machine that makes it, make a machine. Make the machine. If there's not the material, find people that will make the material. Don't think, oh, I can't do that because some part of it doesn't exist.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And something that doesn't get talked about in fashion.
It doesn't, yeah, fashion has, fashion, we're used to picking things out. We're used to, we're going to go and we're going to look at swatches and we're going to pick which ones we like, and we're going to look at how we can make things and the different stitches and what we can use, and we're going to put all that together. And tech just starts out with, what do you want to do?
So you start from the end and work backwards.
And work back, yeah. So
was your studio involved with this? I mean, were they?
We printed this. This was a nightmare to print. This was a complete nightmare to make.
And it looks so effortless, though, in that
right,
picture.
It looks so effortless. Okay, it wasn't as effortless as this one. This one was a coat. This was the first flexible piece, and this was the first flexible material that you could 3D print. And we were commissioned by a technology lounge in London to make something that was 3D printed that everyone could put on. They wanted something, instead of being like custom, they wanted something really huge so that anyone, any size could put it on and understand.
Feel it, right.
Yeah. So it was 400 hours of print time.
It's like a couture dress.
So it was, it came out great, but it was like so much time and so much effort on that one.
Were you finding also that you were kind of overlapping in the art world in a way that you hadn't as well? Because there was sort of this interest, in tech and art in a way that didn't happen with fashion early on.
Yeah, I think there's starting to be. There are a lot of artists using 3D printing. We haven't had that much connection with them. Interestingly, I think a lot of them have trouble with the idea that it's going to be wearable, and that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting, though, to think about that. So that's the whole coat. And then this was then for a 3D printed dress that was shown, that was an attempt to make something really wearable and really, like, this dress you can actually wear. It can be custom fitted and made the exact size for the person.
Were you thinking at this time that, maybe this is going to be fashion design from a 3D perspective, or just I'm going to change my studio? Or were you really thinking of I'm moving in a totally different direction?
When we did this, it was really at that point, this is 2 years ago, and it was really like, okay, let's just make stuff because nobody believes it's possible. Mm-hmm. Nobody in 3D printing world thinks you can make clothes. Nobody in fashion has a clue what 3D printing is. And at this point, the main thing that we started, I started really seeing was that because you're just printing what you want, it's a zero waste process.
Oh, right.
And I think that's one of the really interesting things with it is that, and everyone wanted to be printing in 3D, and it's going to be a really long time before we can print a whole dress, and before anyone's going to print a dress at home or any of that. But to, like, these are printed in flat and then assembled, and instead of cutting anything out, you're just printing the textile. And you're essentially welding it together. So you're only, you know, in traditional fabric, 15% is on the cutting room floor.
Right.
So here's a way to make something without any waste and with each piece to be customized.
It's so interesting because in a way you're sort of reconnecting, in this case it's a whole new textile, but you're reconnecting to the material in a way that you probably didn't as a fashion designer, because you mentioned sort of going around and picking swatches.
Out, yeah.
So what is it like, sort of almost thinking about how do I want this to feel and how is it going to assemble, you know, before it even exists? It's fun and it's really challenging. It's a really different design process, and I think that's part of what's coming with it. You know, do you know Modern Meadow or Bolt Fabrics? And that idea that a fabric starts out as a liquidy chemical, and it can be anything. You know, what the fabric is and how it looks and how it feels is all in the design process, and it can be whatever you want. It's very powerful.
Exciting. Yeah, it's
exciting.
super exciting.
So was there a moment where you just felt that there was, or I guess I should ask, when was the moment that you sort of felt the shift from I'm a designer to I'm going to open the 3D lab and I'm going to sort of engage in a different way?
I think it wasn't a moment. It was really a gradual thing, because I had already been working, at this point doing these, I had been working with wearables for a while and working with, you know, that part of the tech community. The other thing, they can imagine and create anything. They're not real good at, okay, a human being is going to have to put this on. And, you know, we had projects where they'd be like, you know, someone will come in with this sort of computer looking thing, and they're like, yeah, and people are going to wear it. And I'd be like, no. Like,
well, there's this like connection too, not only between wearable, but also it has to be beautiful or have something to say.
Yeah, it has to, and I think that's where fashion is really important to, you know, where the tech community can't, and that industry can't exist without fashion, because it has to be beautiful. It goes on a human being. We are not going to succeed in wearables until we make stuff that people want to wear. You know, it just doesn't. It doesn't really matter what it does if people won't wear it. We worked on a project that was a technology that was an adaptive technology for blind people. And it was a sensor off a hat so that they could sense, because a cane only senses what's waist down, sort of. And this was, and the first iteration of it, they had created this thing and they gave it to blind people to test. And the response was, I'm not going to wear that thing. It looks really weird. And they all refused to wear it. And they were very conscious of, I don't want to look like a blind person. I don't want to wear this weird looking thing. I'd rather risk walking into something.
Interesting. So they could intuit sort of how it felt, or
yeah, they could tell. They had their friends like. People are people. We want to, you know, we care about how we look, how we feel in things.
Well, I'm so glad you brought this up, because there's something I wanted to ask you, because when you start talking about wearable technology and just fabrics that can be so much more than just a fabric, you do start to get into these interesting realms of possibility with in terms of blind. I'm working with some students in the graduate school on sensory issues and psychological sort of therapy. And I'm curious, that's a whole new world, right? I mean, most designers are not thinking about their clothing as something more than something we put on our bodies. So does that also expand sort of how you think about clothing? I mean, there must be, now that you're thinking, how do they look, plus
Yes,
how does it function?
how does it function? I mean, I think that's very important. Going forwards, clothing functions. Clothing is going to function. And the function is going to be really important. We're seeing that already in athletic apparel. What does it do? Does it heat? Does it cool? Does it make you jump higher? All the things that it can do. And that's going to expand a lot. The other part of that is that it's going to kick back all this data. And there's a lot of controversy around that, and there's a lot of good and bad
in terms of how it can track people and what they're doing and their health.
Yeah, their health, or also marketing to them. I mean, most clothes, not most clothes, but a few very big brands and retailers now have RFID chips in it, and so they know when you walk back into that store where you bought it, they know you're there. And they know everything else you bought.
And then you sign onto your Wi-Fi, and then they have all
everything,
of your information.
Right,
yes.
everything else. And they insist they're not connecting it to your credit card.
There is so many overlaps now, but I'm curious, like when you... So typical client, is it more of a tech person coming in and asking you to solve a problem, or is it now fashion people coming in and saying...
Every single one of them is totally different right now.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about sort of...
Okay, so they have ranged from, tech companies that come in with a tech product that they want to put into a piece of clothing. They want it to be a wearable. And they have, they have no idea where to begin with that in general on some of them. Or some of them will have a real strong idea, but whatever, anyway. But coming from the tech side, and then fashion companies wanting to either make something that's different or incorporate technology into their clothing. A lot with 3D printing, we're doing a lot of prototyping and setting up custom things that are buttons, zipper pulls, customized trims and stuff, more than clothing, but doing stuff that way, especially with small brands, that you can do custom things that you couldn't have done earlier, that you would have had to be a major global brand to do the quantities on them.
I heard a speaker here last year mention that there's a whole new potential for IP issues because of this, because all of a sudden there's the potential to customize protein into leathers in a particular design. Do you see that is kind of in the horizon? Or?
Yeah, I don't see it as more than it's been otherwise. I don't see it as... I think that's always been there. That's always been... we were on a thing that was tracing all these different innovations in fashion, and they were talking about, that this woman that one of the first women to have a patent on something was the underwire for a bra.
Right.
And there's always been these issues, so it's not any different. And I think if anything, there is, it's more, it's more fluid. We have had some stuff where it's been an issue where, there are companies that just sit on IP for things, and they don't really do anything with it. And you just go ahead and make stuff and ignore it. And then if you really come up with something, they're either gonna buy you out or send you a cease and desist.
Right. So fashion as usual then.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something. I joke with not these students, but in my 101 classes about how oftentimes clothing, it creates the problem, and then we figure out how to use clothing to fix the problem. So for example, wicking fabrics or things that make us cooler or heated, our body does that naturally. And I'm curious if you think that the more we sort of head into technology, the more that designers have to start thinking these through a little bit more fundamentally than before, where we just sort of said, well, you have to wear a shirt, so we'll make it wick.
Right. I think you do, because I think it starts with, I think the design process, the function is part of the design process now. And so you have to know how those things work. You may not be able to do it yourself, but you have to know how it happens, and that it's possible, and what is possible, what isn't possible, and that's what you design in the function.
Do you think there's like a scientific piece to that where designers will need to go? I'm just, kind of thinking this through in my head, that maybe somebody who's working on, let's say, a compression bra, for example, for running, for a very particular type of running, would they, with all that data that you're talking about, is that something now that designers might even be going to scientists and asking for that data and really thinking about this as utilitarian functional more so than fashion really does?
I think it does, and I think one of the things that kind of makes me crazy about fashion is that we are still designing in Illustrator, and Illustrator doesn't have any data. Illustrator doesn't have any specs to it, and most of the newer, a lot of the newer software that goes into pattern making and things builds in the measurements and the stretch and the compression, and has the potential to build all that technology in, so that as you're designing, you can go, okay, it's going to stretch, it's going to wick, and that just becomes part of it.
Is that like something like Clo or?
Yeah.
Are you guys aware of Clo?
Clo?
No. So I know the graduate school is
Okay.
actually using Clo now.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's amazing technology in terms of.
It's 3D visualization. The other big industrial programs have, like Gerber and Lectra and things have it also. Clo is making it much more accessible to designers, and what it really does is 3D visualizations of your patterns and your designs. So as you're designing, you can see how it will look on an avatar, and your avatar can be anything. Your avatar can be this bottle, and you will drape, you'll pick or create a fabric and drape it on the bottle, and you'll say, okay, I want it to be stretch and I want it to be compression. And you can start, you design all that in. Or you want it to be very loose and drapey, and then you can see it in motion.
So it's a lot where sort of architecture has gone, right? In the sense that, the buildings that are being made today couldn't have been built even 20 years ago, right?
Right.
Let's go back to you a little bit. I know, I forget what your next slide is here, but you transition sort of, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, okay. This is another example of what goes wrong in fashion and tech, and how the worlds disconnect of them, because this dress was incredibly cool. This is 3D printing on a tulle mesh, and we, which is a really great process, and we did some really, really cool stuff with it. And then a photographer shot this for us, And then the people who did the 3D printing part completely freaked out because they are quite religious and they're used to making machines and things, and they completely flipped out on us. And so this is the only place that this ever gets shown, is when I'm speaking.
Congratulations, you all. That's so interesting because, I don't know, I think sometimes we forget sort of that fluidity that we have in the fashion industry around bodies and sexuality that I wouldn't have thought of with tech.
Yeah. You're working with people who make machines and who are engineers and who build things, and they build tables and stuff like this. Right. And yeah, bodies kind of freak them out sometimes. So then this is the first piece that's compostable, which is what we're working on now, is to develop. This was from and to develop from a hand sketch. So this is something where I did a drawing, and then it was brought into a CAD program, and then it was printed just of that without anything cut out. And that is a totally compostable bioplastic. So that would decompose in a few years. So the idea with that is really to, maybe we can make fast fashion that isn't bad for the world.
Right, because a typical T-shirt is what, 60, 70 years to decompose?
A cotton T-shirt.
Yeah, cotton T-shirt.
Yeah, a polyester T-shirt is like,
yeah,
I don't know.
It's going to exist longer than all of us.
Oh yeah.
and it's so delicate. Is that? I mean, there's so. Is the technology getting better in the sense of the materials
It's getting better, and it's moving forwards really, really quickly. It's not there yet, where it's not at a point where it's really wearable and strong enough and durable. But it's moving, that didn't exist, that material didn't exist at all 2 years ago.
So things are moving that fast.
Yeah, it's moving that fast where it's...
Well, and I know that there's a lot of interest, particularly in fashion. I mentioned the proteins, but just being able to do more natural, organic.
Right.
Is that something that you're seeing moving faster with the interest in fashion, or is it still sort of... I mean, these things are moving so quickly, it's hard to say it's slow, but...
Yeah, they're moving really fast. I think the technology on it's moving really fast, and a lot of it's there. The applications aren't there. And there is, yes, some of it's going to go to really big companies. Some of that with like Modern Meadow and people is going to be really giant companies, and so they're going to have to launch it really big. And then some of it is there's just stuff happening.
Right. Do you think that? Do you think that the 3D part of this should be taught in design school now? I mean, are we sort of at that point where these tools are sort of at a company, or are they still?
I think that and FIT actually has a 3D printing department now, and there's a guy named Michael Parker who's teaching here, who's super cool. And I think every fashion student needs to understand design in 3D. I don't think you need to necessarily know how to do it to the level of creating clothes, but you need to understand how it works, and to be able to visualize in 3 dimensions, because I think that's the future. That's clothes 3D. That is, anyone who does gaming, it's pretty familiar. And so, fashion still works flat a lot, and we need to get beyond that because that's going away.
It's interesting. So so you started your company. It's the Sylvia, the Heisel Lab. not a fashion company now. I mean, but
Right.
although you're doing fashion.
Fashion,
So
yeah.
talk to us sort of what the company, what you founded the company for, and sort of what your day-to-day looks like now that you're not the designer with the nameplate on your door.
It's super different each day. It's it's challenging and creative, the way that being a designer was not for me at that point. That every project we take is totally different at this point. Some of them are, super. Some of them are very fashion. We did address Pyre Moss had a piece in MoMA last year, and that was we actually made the whole thing and fabricated it and worked out, and he had a really specific things that he wanted of how it would look, and a lot of it didn't really exist. So there was a lot of work, that was super interesting. Every project is different, and it's fun.
So do you have fashion designers then who come to you looking to do something? Well, I'm going to open that up. I mean, what are they looking for when they come to you? Because you do a lot.
We do a lot. Yeah, I mean, most of them are looking for, most of them are looking for 3D printed accessories at this point. That's the most common and the easiest, and prototyping of either, a lot of it's trims that then get produced in non-3D printed. But then some of it's other totally crazy projects. Some of it's promotional things of clothes for displays, or somebody wants something with lights in it for a liquor company launch or something.
So there's some marketing.
There's some, a lot of it's not ready because you can't really produce these clothes yet. A lot of it's kind of weird projects that way.
So in a way, that crossover to art a little bit, yeah?
Yes,
Because
yes,
these are
totally.
one-off pieces.
They are one-off,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what do you think about designers like Iris Van Herpen and others who are starting to incorporate those pieces on the runway?
I think it's super cool. I
Have
think
you-
it's...
Have
yeah.
you all seen Iris's
Iris Van Herpen.
pieces? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that, her in particular, I think she just had such an amazing way of integrating it into her designs. But I'm curious, what you think, and if you think there's other designers out there that are really starting to think differently and producing interesting results.
Yeah, I think her case is a little complicated because she has access to a very sort of large team, and a lot of people work on those dresses, and those dresses cost a lot. They are really couture pieces. She has a lot of sponsorship, and so in one way they are amazing, in another way they are not accessible for anyone else. And they're not something, there's one of the things with 3D printing is that there are printers that are desktop printers. You can go and you can buy a printer on Amazon for $250 and print some things yourself. And there are other printers that are in the mid six-figure range that need large venting and industrial space and all, and they create really different things. And what you can create with your printer you bought on Amazon is not quite what you can create.
So there's a bit of a chasm.
There's kind of, and some of the really interesting things are things that are coming out of kind of do-it-yourself, out of what people are doing with home printers and stuff also.
Do you? I know there's a lot of so like Adidas and some of these sports companies have taken an interest into, especially shoes. Do you think that that's where a lot of the money is in fashion right now, at least in terms of these new technologies, or do you think that is that going to continue to drive activewear perhaps as a way of looking
Yeah,
at this?
I mean, I think, those companies are driving innovation in fashion right now. There's no question that Adidas and Nike are driving their, when I was talking about patents and stuff, they're sitting on all kinds of things, and they have big development labs for tech stuff, and they're doing really cool, really interesting stuff. It would be really nice to see fashion companies do that. It would be really, really good if some of the more fashion brands started doing that.
Well, that's why you're there, right? Is to help facilitate
to help
this.
them,
yes.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of that is happening also on the manufacturing side at scale of the big, I think there's more of it coming from some of the big global manufacturers rather than the designers also.
And is it happening mostly, I mean, is it happening in China primarily, and that's where this is coming from? Or?
China, Sri Lanka, there's a company, MAS, out of Sri Lanka that's doing really interesting stuff. Some of the big European companies, Kering has got a really big initiative on technology and sustainability in fashion. I know they're looking at some stuff, really, how can we make things in other ways in the luxury market?
You mentioned that earlier. That's such an interesting intersection. Do you think that in many ways is providing more impetus or more funds to sort of explore technology out? Because oftentimes the technology is gimmicky, right?
Right.
And yet, from a sustainable point of view, it has real sort of bottom line, potential.
Yeah, I think there's these big gaps right now between here's the technology people, here's the sustainability people, here's the fashion people, and somehow it all has to come together more. It's not all working together yet, but it is all trying. I mean, I think there's Adidas has on their 3D printing, they are working on some shoes that are sustainable, and they're some of them are very expensive shoes, and that idea, and there are some things like that where it really connects. It's luxury product connected with sustainability, connected with technology, but not many yet.
Do you have a sense of, this is, probably a very difficult question to answer, but do you have a sense of when there might be sort of the next tipping point for technology and fashion? Because we're sort of hit one, and I'm curious if you just think we're getting close to another.
I think it's going to be more gradual. I think there's going to be I think that we are going to slowly incorporate things. When we did a skirt with lights in it about 5 years ago, and when we sent it out to photo shoots, we had a couple of times where we were like, oh no, the models won't wear it because they're afraid of getting electrocuted. And that's gone. Like, that is 5 years ago, and that has totally changed. Nobody thinks that they're going to blow up if they wear something that has...
Well, they sleep with their iPhone under their pillow anyway, so, right?
So we've gotten that far on... We're all used to technology now. It doesn't do anything great yet, but it's, it's coming. I think there's going to have to be something much cooler looking than there is right now.
Right. I want to open it up to the students because I think there'll be some questions for you. If you don't mind, can we grab the mic? And perfect, you start.
Good afternoon. The first question is, how challenging was to integrate your knowledge of fashion to 3D printing and smart textiles and wearables? Um,
It's you know it's super challenging. I think the main thing is, each project is challenging, but I think the main thing is learning to work with a bigger team on it, because I am not, when I was designing clothes, I wasn't the pattern maker, but I knew how to look at what the pattern maker was doing and go, okay, I like that, I don't like that, change that, but I didn't know how to actually do it. I don't know how to weave the cloth. I don't know how. This is the same thing. You have to know basics of engineering, basics of 3D printing, but you don't do it yourself. You work with, you work with a bigger team on creating things.
It's so interesting because most designers aren't weaving their own things.
Yeah, it's not any,
But to understand how it works.
You understand how it works. I mean, I'm pretty good at 3D modeling, but I'm not great at it. I can operate a desktop printer sometimes. I know all about what you can do with electronics and clothes and hooking up the batteries and everything. I can't do any of it myself. It's about knowing what's possible and knowing how to communicate that and listen to the people who do know and work with them.
Another question.
I have another, but I don't know.
Sure. Is your mic on?
Yes. Will the cost of 3D printing eventually become affordable, do you think, or more demand will be more expensive?
I think it will be affordable. We're working on our stuff. We're working on 3D printing direct from plastic pellets. And plastic pellets are very, very inexpensive. So you're looking at a much lower, we're trying to lower the material cost to almost nothing. And it will enable, it won't enable making every kind of clothing. It'll only make certain products, but it will make it very inexpensive.
All right. Another question. Oh, all the way across. We're getting very good at this mic passing, but then it makes sure we get it on the video so that we have.
Okay, I was looking at your website on last night, and I was looking at your creations. So I'm curious because you was once a fashion designer that went into 3D design. So I want to know, what's your inspiration and what inspired you to go into 3D design and learn the technology of 3D?
I think just the idea that it was a new way to make things, and that it just felt really restrictive of how we make clothes today is based on technology that's existed for over 200 years. We have seams under our arms and between our legs on all our clothing because that's what you had to do to take a flat piece of fabric that didn't stretch and wrap it around a human body. And we don't need that anymore. We can't 3D print a whole garment yet, but we can definitely print parts that couldn't exist in a flat garment. So creatively, that seemed like, why are we not using these things that exist?
It's such a buzzword right now, this whole idea of design thinking, but it really is sort of thinking more 3D, thinking more outside of the flat sort of 2D environment that we have.
Yeah, and thinking out, like, just yeah, we are so held back by what we've always done. There's so many things in fashion that are like, okay, that's the way we've always made this thing, so we'll keep making it that way. There's no reason for it.
So do you find yourself making new things up? I mean, I don't have to do a dolman sleeve anymore. I can just do a sleeve.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be, it's really empowering. It's also really confusing at times. Like then you're like staring at, we play with avatars a lot, with starting with just a thing, a bottle, a human shape or something, and going, okay, let's just start throwing stuff on it. And what do we want?
It's like a whole new world of made to measure.
Yeah.
Yes.
One more question. So, do other designers out there, does they inspire you to make these 3D designs, or it's just like you just look at what technology is coming from, like the iPhones and Samsungs and all them stuff, and then do you use that as inspiration?
I think each of our projects where we're working with another designer have been really rewarding, because as opposed to working with a technology company, designers come with all these ideas, and we spend a lot of time going, that's not going to work, let's dial it back and let's try something else, or what about but they come with a lot of creativity and a lot of ideas, and it's always challenging and exciting.
Do they often come? So I had a graduate group that came to me on a project they were working on, and they were solving the idea of temperature in a corporate space and saying, instead of solving it by air condition or heat, let's solve it on an individual basis. Is that sort of what like a tech company would come in and ask you? Yeah.
Yeah. We actually worked on a project that
Oh,
was
you did?
like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Where they were looking at that for warehouses and warehouse
And
workers.
then are they looking at it? I mean, you're obviously a designer, so clearly your thought is how do I make something that would look well, that people would want to wear?
Right.
And they're probably thinking not only cost, but how
They're
much am I going to save?
They're just thinking energy cost.
Right,
That's
energy
all they
cost,
cared about
okay.
was energy cost, because like we don't have to heat this like huge space.
That's got to be fascinating, because it's so unusual for a fashion designer of any
Yeah.
type to be talking about like how do we save money on the AC?
Yeah. But designers come with a vision a lot. I mean, some of them, we did something recently where a designer came to us and they had really, she had like a thing made out of pipe cleaners that was, and it's this triangle thing, and she's got a whole amazing story about it and what this shape means and how it works in with all the rest of her stuff in her designs. But she doesn't have a visual on it that's, she has a sketch that's a hand sketch, and then how do you turn that into an actual product? And how do you make that into something that can be produced and sold?
Fascinating. Other questions? Yeah, right. Perfect. Push it up. Yeah. Should be on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi. Have you made any knit clothing with 3D printing? And also, if so, can you just make like a knit T-shirt? And how long would that take?
I don't work, there is 3D knitting, and which is primarily, there's a Shimaseki whole garment knit machine, which is kind of an amazing, it's a really interesting, because what they've done is that it's pretty much the same as a standard knitting machine, except that they have created an algorithm that figures out that the furthest away points on the garment are from, X to Y. And so instead of knitting in the different pieces and then sewing them together, it's knitting the
shape.
whole shape in. But it's doing it it's knitting at weird sort of angles rather than knitting in rows as we think of them. And all that is an algorithm, which is really interesting that they're using data that way to figure out a new way to make things. Knitting is a very, knitting, there really isn't, that's what's considered 3D knitting, and knitting is already a zero waste form of manufacturing, pretty much. So it doesn't make any sense with 3D printing. So we haven't done anything like that. And you can 3D print a t-shirt, but I guess I would ask why, because you can already make one really inexpensively, so why make the same thing? Why not make something that you couldn't make other ways?
And I'm curious, so how long would just a typical t-shirt take to print?
It would depend on the printer. It would depend on, yeah, like.
If you're Adidas
yeah.
or Iris Van Herman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, quick question. Has there been a response of consumers or models that have worn your 3D garments or clothing, like comfort-wise, or being able to like walk in it, squat, or anything like that?
On most of them, they are really prototypes at this point. They're not, of the stuff that we're doing, it's not wearable. I think for real life, it's not there yet. I would, the Adidas, the shoe that they have out, the Carbon Futurecraft 4D shoe, is amazing, and I would go look at that because that's probably the best example of using 3D printing for a production at scale item that could not exist otherwise. You would have to make 50 different pieces and glue them together to get that sole in with conventional manufacturing. But that's, again, also back to the $500,000 printer, not the desktop printer.
It's interesting because there's really kind of two categories of technology that we're talking about. On the one hand, it's very 3D. It's about how we're creating. And then on the other hand, it's what we were talking about earlier, which is how are garments being made? How do we use data? Do the clothes actually read our bodies? How much do you think that is a split in terms of the business that you do? And I mean, clearly, some of these things are being worn every day. I mean, that have compression in them and wicking and...
I think it's all going to come together and be the same at one point. At this point, for designers, it's probably always going to be different things. Are you working on how it's made or what it does or what you want it to look like? From a consumer's point of view, they don't, consumers don't care. They care that they get this really cool thing and it fits and it's beautiful and it functions. All the rest of it is our problem on making the stuff.
Do you think there's one particular garment or category of garments that really could use an overhaul in terms of how it's made or thought about?
Healthcare is adaptive apparel is the low-hanging fruit on it because that's where there's a problem that can be solved. So that's a lot of the first wave of stuff that's coming is clothes that function that way, that help people. If you can find a problem for all of us that technology can really solve, you will, be a billionaire. That would, but there hasn't been, that's sort of for a lot of, that's the faraway goal but as yet either the technology isn't there to make something that would be so amazing or it would be so expensive or it's a gadget and people don't want it.
Right. Interesting. Other questions? I think we have time for at least one more. Yep. So it has to be price conscious to a degree. It can't be a gadget, and it has to solve a function. And then they're a billionaire.
And it has to look
And look good.
really, it has to look really cool. You know, the first thing is it has to look amazing, and it has to be affordable. It has to, you know, it has to be something people want, something they can afford, and something that is better than anything that's out there today.
All right.
Hi. Do you have experience with 3D printed heels?
Yes. There's a lot of them, and there's a lot you can do, and they're very easy to prototype, and you need to have a metal shank, little metal thing
make it
inside it
wonderful.
as yet, because a plastic heel will break when you walk on it. That is something where that's actually something where it's pretty easy to do on a desktop printer, and to come up with a lot of really cool ones. Is that something you're interested in doing?
Yeah.
Talk to Michael Parker,
Okay.
who's here at FIT, and tell him that I said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So we're coming to an end here, but we do have a lot of designers in this class and people who are also working in business and marketing and will be sort of connected to this new wave. Let's start with the designers first. What would you say is one thing that a way to think about perhaps design differently, or something that should be integrated into how they're learning to make them successful?
Think about the body in 3 dimensions. Think about 3-dimensional design. When you're designing, view things in 3D, find a way to do that. That's and then think function. Don't think function, think outside the box of what are the givens right now.
And obviously you work with a lot of business people because of this space. What would you say to those who are studying more business and marketing? What are the opportunities, or how should this be looked at?
Ooh, you know, the business and especially the marketing end in fashion is way ahead of the production and manufacturing end right now. I think with digital marketing, there's so much, there's so much stuff coming out of that that's really innovative. And how do you connect that to the actual clothing? But again, it is that we view our world in 3D. We view it through our phone in 3 dimensions.
Thank you so much for coming today. It's been such a fun time to
Thank
talk
you.
to you and to really think about sort of the idea that creativity can kind of explode if you think about it outside of the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
Cool.
so much, Sylvia.
Thanks.
And I think you had an email or a contact just
Oh,
in case
yeah.
they wanted to get more
Yep.
information.
Oh, that's another dress. That's another vest. That's more compostable stuff. And that's my email. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next week in the Haft with Mark Drew, the photographer. All right. Thank you.